My brother's obsessed ex has been stalking our family for several years. At first, it was just constant messages and phone calls, but over time, she started invading our personal space, showing up near our home and following us in public places. The situation kept getting scarier and more out of control. Eventually, her behavior crossed every line, and the police had to arrest her so we could finally feel safe again. When I look back on those years, I want to believe it was all just a nightmare that could be forgotten. But even now, when everything outside is quiet and safe, I still sometimes glance over my shoulder. It all started 6 years ago. I was 11, the youngest in our family, an ordinary girl from a small suburban town. My brother Nathan was my hero. Kind, determined, with a clear smile and a rare ability to care for everyone around him. He was 8 years older than me and always treated me like a little princess. Our house was filled with warmth. Sunday dinners, endless conversations in the kitchen, family trips out of town. Everything felt so right that any disruption seemed impossible. That's when Julia entered his life. I remember the first time I saw her. Beautiful, confident, with long chestnut hair and eyes that held a predatory glint. Nathan brought her home without warning. Usually he told us everything in advance, but this time, nothing. Mom looked flustered. Dad was cautious, and I, staring at her, felt a strange sense of unease I couldn't explain back then. On the surface, Julia seemed perfect. Polite, sweet, laughing with us, joining my father's jokes. But there was something forced about her smile, something too carefully rehearsed, as if she had practiced it in front of a mirror. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. Julia visited often, helped Mom in the kitchen, showed interest in my hobbies. Sometimes it even felt like she wanted to become a part of our family more than Nathan himself did. But whenever someone talked to my brother, Julia would instantly appear by his side, interrupting, touching his arm, demanding his attention. At first, it was almost funny, but over time, it grew unsettling. She was jealous of everyone, even me. The real crack appeared the night after a party. I was sitting in the living room when Nathan came home with a huge bruise on his face. He was never the kind of person to get into fights. His eyes were filled with heavy exhaustion. I whispered, asking what happened. Because of Julia. He muttered and disappeared into his room, slamming the door. My heart clenched with anxiety. That was the first moment I realized we were standing on the edge of something terrible, and there was no way back. After that night, it felt like a heavy tension settled over our house, something no one dared to say out loud. Nathan didn't talk about the details, and I was too scared to ask. Julia kept coming over as if nothing had happened, laughing and throwing her arms around my brother at every opportunity. But I started noticing how he would tense up under her touch, how he avoided looking into her eyes. At some point, she decided to get closer to me, closer than ever before. She invited me out, took me shopping, bought me small gifts, and told me stories about her youth, where everything always ended with betrayal. I listened, feeling an odd pressure, like I was supposed to pick a side. One evening, as we sat in a cafe over 2 cups of cocoa, Julia suddenly started talking about my brother. How much she loved him, how scared she was to lose him, how she could barely breathe without him. Her voice shook, her eyes filled with tears. I felt awkward and scared, nodding because I didn't know what else to do. She placed her hand over mine and whispered that I was the only one who could help her. I wanted to leave right then, but I stayed, not wanting to hurt her. And that was when the calls started. At first, just one, around 10 at night. Julia sobbing into the phone, begging me to talk to Nathan, to convince him to come back. Then the calls became regular, later and later, sometimes at 1 in the morning, sometimes almost 3. She said her life was empty without him, that she was nothing without him. I tried to comfort her, terrified that if I didn't answer, something terrible would happen. One night, the call was different. I picked up the phone, and instead of sobbing, I heard a cold, even voice. "Tell Nathan I'm taking the ticket to Sam tonight," she said, and the line went dead. I froze, feeling a knot of dread tighten inside me. I kept texting her, asking if she was okay, begging her to answer, but there was nothing. The next day, I told my brother what had happened. His face turned pale, and he drove over to her house to make sure she was alive. A few hours later, they came back together, acting as if nothing had ever happened. Julia smiled at me, easily and casually, like she hadn't terrorized me all night. I wanted to believe the worst was over, that it had just been a final burst of her despair. But deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning. It only got worse. After Nathan started talking to Julia again, it was like she had found a second wind. Her oddities weren't small anymore. They turned into real bursts of madness. She would show up at our house without warning, bringing gifts, baked goods, leaving notes on the bathroom mirror. Sometimes when I walked home from school, she would be waiting on the corner, smiling with that strained, rehearsed grin. I tried to keep my distance, but inside, the anxiety kept growing. One day, I came home and found my parents and brother sitting in the living room. Their faces were tense, Mom looked worried, and Dad sat in grim silence. They asked me to sit down. I knew instantly something was wrong. Mom said, "Your brother told us how you're really feeling." I had no idea what she was talking about. Nathan, not meeting my eyes, explained, "Julia said you were the one calling her every night, complaining about your life and asking for help." For a moment, I couldn't speak. A hot wave of rage rose inside me. "That's a lie," I shouted, my hands trembling as I pulled out my phone. I showed them all the calls, all the messages she had sent me. Mom stared at the screen in horror. Dad let out a heavy sigh. Nathan looked like he had been punched. After that confrontation, Julia disappeared. No more visits, no more calls. We started to breathe easier, hoping it was finally over. But the peace didn't last. Almost a year later, I saw her again. It was the last day of school before winter break. I was walking across the schoolyard with a friend when I spotted her, standing far away, nervously tugging at her sleeves. Her hair was messy, her face gaunt with dark circles under her eyes. I quickly turned away, hoping to slip by unnoticed. But she saw me. Julia rushed toward me, reaching out for a hug. I stepped back. She asked plaintively, "Are you mad at me?" I stayed silent. She kept going. I wanted to apologize. "Please believe me, I'm sick." And then she said my childhood nickname, one only Nathan used to call me. It felt like a punch to the stomach. I turned away and headed for the parking lot where Nathan was waiting. Julia grabbed my shoulder, but I pulled free and practically ran. In the car, I sat silently, my fists clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. Nathan glanced in the rearview mirror. "Was that her?" I nodded. He gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. That night, someone knocked on our door. First softly, then louder. When Dad looked through the peephole, he exhaled sharply. "It's Julia again." We hid inside, choosing not to open. She wandered around the yard, crying, screaming, muttering to herself. Sometimes her cries turned into animal-like howls. I crouched behind the couch, covering my ears. That was the first time I felt real terror. Not fear of the unknown, but horror at a person I once knew. After that night, things didn't return to normal. We changed our phone numbers, blocked everything we could, and even disconnected the old landline. For a while, it seemed quiet, almost peaceful, but the tension never really left. Then the messages started coming through mutual friends, random emails, and anonymous social media accounts we all knew belonged to her. Some were desperate apologies. Others were curses and threats that made my skin crawl. Julia's voice haunted us through crackly voicemails left on the few numbers she still managed to find. Sometimes she sobbed, sometimes she screamed, and sometimes her voice was so calm it was even scarier. We all tried to move on. Nathan focused on work. My parents clung to routines, and I threw myself into school and friends. But everywhere I went, I kept seeing a familiar car. At first, I thought it was paranoia, just my mind playing tricks on me because of everything that had happened. It would appear at the grocery store, parked across the street from school, idling near the coffee shop where I worked part-time. Always the same old beat-up silver sedan with a dented bumper. I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but every time I saw it, a chill ran down my spine. One afternoon after work, I spotted it parked near the back entrance of the mall. I froze, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. For a moment, I thought I saw a shadow move inside the car, but when I blinked, it was gone. I hurried to my car and locked the doors immediately, my heart hammering against my ribs. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was the same feeling I had that awful night Julia came to our house with a bat, wild and broken. The fear was back, thicker than ever, wrapping itself around me like a second skin. I didn't tell anyone at first because I didn't want to be the reason my family lived in fear again. I thought maybe if I ignored it, it would stop. But deep down, I knew better. Julia wasn't done with us. She had disappeared from our doorstep, but she had only shifted her game into the shadows. The nightmare was far from over. It was just beginning to evolve into something even more terrifying. The night it all exploded started like any other. I had a small role in the school play. Nothing important, but my family came to support me anyway. The auditorium was packed, the lights were hot, and for a while I forgot about the fear that shadowed my life. After the show, we stood in the lobby, talking to other families, laughing about forgotten lines and missed cues. I remember feeling almost normal. Then I saw it. That same silver sedan, parked just beyond the far side of the lot, barely visible under a flickering streetlight. My chest tightened. I told myself not to panic, not to make a scene, but my hands were already shaking. Nathan noticed immediately. "Is that her?" he asked under his breath. I just nodded. We decided to leave quickly, making some excuse to the others. As we crossed the lot, I could feel eyes burning into my back. I dared not look. We piled into the car, and Dad pulled out onto the main road. For a few minutes, everything seemed fine. Then headlights flared in the mirror. high beams slicing through the darkness, so bright I had to shield my eyes. She was right behind us. At first, Dad tried to ignore it, driving at a steady speed, taking random turns to see if we were just being paranoid. But every turn we took, the car followed. My heart hammered in my chest as I crouched down in the back seat, trying to make myself invisible. Mom was fumbling for her phone, whispering harshly to Dad about calling 911. "Stay calm," Dad said, his knuckles white on the wheel. We sped through the neighborhood, making sharp turns, cutting through empty streets, trying to lose her. But she stuck to us like a shadow. At one point, she gunned the engine and pulled up so close that if Dad had hit the brakes, she would have slammed into us. The headlights blazed into the car, and for a second, it felt like the whole world had narrowed to just us and her. My mom finally got through to the dispatcher, trying to explain our location through gasps and broken directions. I was curled up on the seat, biting my lip to keep from screaming. After what felt like an eternity, Dad managed to take a hard right onto a side street. We held our breath, waiting. For a moment, nothing. Then the headlights disappeared. She was gone. We didn't stop. We drove straight home, every muscle in my body still tense and ready to snap. When we pulled into our driveway, Dad checked the street 3 times before letting us out. Inside, we turned on every light in the house and double-checked every door and window. That night, none of us slept. Julia had made it clear. She wasn't going to let us go. Not ever. After that night, I stopped pretending everything was okay. The fear settled deep into my bones, a permanent companion I couldn't shake. I kept the curtains closed, avoided staying out after dark, and triple-checked every lock before going to bed. But none of it made me feel safe. One night, about a week after the chase, I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep. I had cracked the window open just a little to let some air in, trying to convince myself that fresh air would somehow quiet the anxiety clawing at my chest. I heard a faint noise like a scuffle or a scrape, but I told myself it was just the wind. Then a flash of light cut through the darkness of my room. Not lightning. It was too focused, too deliberate. My heart stopped. Another flash, and I realized with sickening certainty that someone was taking pictures through my window. I launched out of bed and bolted to my parents' room, barely coherent as I tried to explain. Dad grabbed his baseball bat and went outside. But of course, by then, whoever it was, whoever I knew it had to be, was gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, Dad promised to install cameras around the house, and Nathan started stopping by more often, checking on me, walking the perimeter before he left. We tried to pretend we were reclaiming control, but it was an illusion. Julia had found a way to get even closer. A few weeks later, Nathan's fiancée, Kara, called in tears. Their puppy, Ike, had disappeared from their backyard. It wasn't the first time. A few months ago, he'd gone missing for a few hours, only to show up on the porch later, looking confused but unharmed. We had brushed it off as a fluke. But this time was different. Ike didn't come back. We searched for hours, driving through the neighborhood, calling his name, putting up flyers. Nothing. Nathan was devastated. Ike wasn't just a dog. He was family, a bright spot in all the darkness we had been drowning in. A week after Ike vanished, Dad was mowing the lawn when he found something on the front porch. It was Ike's old puppy collar, the one he had lost months ago. Somehow, it had been placed right where we would find it, like a twisted trophy. I felt sick. Everything inside me screamed that this was her. Julia wasn't just watching us anymore. She was reaching into our lives, tearing pieces away, leaving them at our feet like warnings. And the worst part was knowing she wasn't done, not by a long shot. It took another few weeks before everything started to unravel for her. Kara was out shopping with her mom in a small town about 40 minutes away from us when it happened. They were walking past a row of shops when they noticed a silver car parked along the street with a dog inside, panting against the window. Kara said her heart stopped the moment she saw him. Even from a distance, she knew. It was Ike, his mismatched eyes, the white marking on his chest, the way he perked up the second he saw her. She didn't even hesitate. Kara called Nathan, then the police, and sat herself right on the car's bumper so it couldn't leave. When the woman who had the car returned, she looked startled, then annoyed when she saw Kara and the officers waiting. She wasn't Julia. She was some random girl, and after a few questions, she admitted she had bought Ike off a woman a few weeks earlier through an online ad. She described the seller as sketchy, desperate, pushing to make a quick sale. It was enough for the police to get a search warrant. When they went to the apartment complex the woman mentioned, they found Julia living there under someone else's name. What they discovered inside was worse than anything we had imagined. Hundreds of photos covered the walls and surfaces. Photos of Nathan, of my parents, of me, of Kara, of our house, our cars, even Ike. There were pictures taken through our windows, pictures of us sleeping, eating, laughing, walking into stores, Some were printed out and taped together into weird collages. Others were stuck into notebooks filled with scribbled, rambling writing. They found stolen items, things from our porch, random small objects that had gone missing over the years, little trophies. Worst of all, they found Ike's crate shoved into the back of her closet, filthy and stinking, with scraps of food and an empty water bowl inside. Somehow he had survived it. Somehow he had survived her. Julia wasn't just obsessed. She was dangerous. She had been stalking us for years, documenting every move, planning who knows what. She was arrested on the spot, charged with stalking, harassment, theft, animal cruelty, and a list of other things so long it made my head spin. For the first time in years, we felt like maybe, just maybe, this was really going to end. But even as they took her away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. Some nightmares don't end just because the monster is locked away. The months that followed Julia's arrest were some of the strangest of my life. In theory, we were safe. She was behind bars, facing charges that would keep her away from us for a long time. But the fear didn't just disappear. It clung to us like a second skin, like smoke that seeped into everything and refused to lift. Every creak of the floorboards, every car idling too long near the house, every unfamiliar figure on the street sent a jolt of terror through me. I started sleeping with the lights on again. Nathan became more protective than ever, calling me every night to check if I was okay. My parents, once so carefree, now double-checked every lock before bed and rarely went out at night. We were all trying to heal, but none of us knew how. Therapy helped a little, but there are some wounds you can't just talk away. Ike recovered faster than any of us. His tail wagged again. His playful spirit returned. Sometimes I envied him for that. Nathan and Kara eventually moved into a different part of town, somewhere quieter, farther from the memories. I stayed with my parents, finishing high school, trying to piece together a version of myself that wasn't always looking over her shoulder. Life went on because it had to. We learned to live with the ghosts. Sometimes, late at night, I would lie in bed and replay it all. The flashing lights at my window, the sickening realization at the theater, the blinding fear on those dark roads. It felt unreal, like a nightmare stitched into the seams of real life. But it happened. It happened to us. And no matter how much distance we put between ourselves and Julia, the truth would always be there. You never really know what someone is capable of until it's too late. I share this story now not because I think it will erase what happened, but because maybe someone out there needs to hear it. Maybe someone out there is seeing the small signs, the obsessive texts, the sudden anger, the subtle manipulation, and wondering if they're overreacting. You're not. Listen to that voice inside you. Trust it. If we had trusted ours earlier, maybe things wouldn't have gone so far. Maybe we could have spared ourselves years of fear. Maybe we could have spared Ike. But we survived. She didn't break us. We carry the scars, yes, but we also carry the strength it took to fight through 6 years of hell. And that strength, that stubborn, desperate will to keep going, is something no one will ever take from us again.